Okay.
Hey guys, thanks Dinah for that introduction. Uh, guys, my journey has started. I have 12 years of experience in the IT industry, and RPA UiPath started for me from 2020 with HSI. I was really, what do I say? A COVID batch or call it, right? And upskilled myself. HSI did a great job, and I came back to my career in the year 2020, and there's been no looking back. So that's just a brief about. I've got a variety of good experiences and very enjoyable so far. So I'm very happy that you've all chosen this, and I'm very excited. Over to others. Thank you.
Yeah, Preeti, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hello all. So myself, Preeti. I have around 5 years of experience in IT, and then I have around 3.5 years of experience with UiPath. So I have also been at HSI, and I have learned UiPath from them, and I was also working as a trainer there for UiPath RPA. I mean, I have done the same series, but with them. Yeah, I'm happy to be back. Currently, I am working with Boundaryless for past 2 years. Thank you. Over to you,
Thank you.
Anmol.
Thank you, Preeti. Hi, everyone. Pleased to meet you. I am Anmol. I am technical architect at Speridian Technologies, Canada. Yep, and we'll be meeting during the course of this series. So yeah, good luck for the series.
Thank you. And then Revathi, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi everyone. Welcome to the series. Not sure whether you attended the awareness session. Go to the series page, get the awareness session recording there. Go through that, get the know the installation of UiPath RPA done by today, so that you catch on to whatever is going to be taught by these wonderful experts of UiPath RPA. Yeah, that's about it. And welcome to the session.
Thank you. And then Priya will be joining us in a few minutes, so she'll introduce herself once she starts talking. So with that, Permina, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you. I'm sharing my screen now.
Okay, and I can see it.
All right, great. So let me start. Okay. Screen is good, right? So far?
Yeah, we want to put it in presentation mode.
I thought it is in presentation mode, isn't it? I thought I am in presentation mode. Isn't it appearing in full screen here?
Yeah, I see the next slide there, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
You're in presentation preview.
There you go.
Better now? All right.
Yes.
Okay. So okay. So do we all know what is RPA, right? So any quick volunteers, I can give a minute, not even a minute, a few seconds if anybody knows what is an RPA. Just a full form?
It's a robotic process automation.
Great. So what is robotic process automation? It is, as the name suggests, this robot, there is a process and you automate it, right? As simple as that. It mimics human actions, and once, any mundane tasks, any repetitive tasks, you want loads, volumes of data, and all of that, we do have this excellent concept of RPA where we automate it and the process gets over within minutes, right? So it is just mimicking the human actions like keyboard inputs, mouse movements, reading the screen, everything can be mimicked in the computer form, right? So that's RPA in short. So, right. So now we know what are the advantages of a computer versus a human. You have accuracy, you have speed, you have compliance, right? You have so many rules to cater to, so many exceptions that you need to handle. You need to security compliances, everything is handled by the bot at very, very high speed and high security measures. And of course, you reduce the cost of process execution because you have less human involvement and you have bots that can do the job for you in like probably less than half or even 25% of the time, right? And easier scaling because, nowadays uh, uh, the process of developing has become so, what do I say, modularized, and you can reuse components and everything. Scaling is very easy and it's really cost effective as well. Okay, so these are the common use cases that we usually see in our companies, right? Corporates. So I'm going to take a very simple one. Let me take financial statement reconciliation, right? That is just like you have an invoice and you have some, let's say GST invoices, right? So you compare both the documents. Let's say you have 10,000 documents in one and you have 10,000 documents in the other set, and you need to compare both the taxes, what to compute match. If there are differences, you list them down and send an exception email to the business, okay, how many are success and how many are non-successful, things like that. So it's just a simple way of what I said. uh, it's a very simplified process, but there are a lot of nuances, a lot of conditions, there are a lot of exceptions that we need to handle, a lot of sub-processes, you will need to use databases, you will need loads of input files and integration with a lot of third-party tools and so on. I can just go on and on, but at the base of it, any process that is abundant in volume in any of the departments that you can see here and even others, right? So that can be automated. Most of it can be automated unless it involves a lot of decision making and things like that, right? So I'm not going to go too much into all of this. So I'm going to start with my main content for the day. All right. Before that, any quick questions about RPA? What is the purpose of RPA? Anybody? All I guess it's pretty simple. So in case anyone asks anything, has anything to ask, we quickly do so now. All right, great. So here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a demo, right? As to really how we do it. I'm going to open up the studio and do it. But I'm going to just, before that, go through a few slides and give you an introduction, okay? I'm not going to go one slide after the other and give the demo because that doesn't make much of sense, okay? So now the main thing, what I'm not going to touch upon studio as well, because I know that you've attended a long session last week and you are all hands-on on the basics of how to open the studio, what are the various panels that are there and all of that, right? So I'm not really touching up too much on that. But once you open the studio and you're all set, right? What you need to do is you need to know before you start coding, what are variables? So when I say variables, they are actually just some kind of an anchor or a storage container that stores multiple types of data, right? So why do we use a variable, right? There are two types actually. There's a variable and there is a constant. Constant is something that you know that this is the value that remains throughout the program. It doesn't change. But many a times that's not the case, right? So you have variations of data. If you are taking data from an Excel, each row is going to be totally different from the other. So how are you going to track all this? You are not going to keep constants for every row or every record there, right? So we have something called as variables that you can, the values keep changing as the record keeps changing, right? You can use these variables anywhere. So we're going to see hands-on on how to go about declaring a variable and how to, some simple, I've made these examples really, really, really simple so that you understand the concept. I have not brought in anything complicated here. I want you to really to be, my intention is to make you understand what are the different types, how to get hands-on as quickly as possible, right? So we have, in not only for variables, for everything, there is a naming convention that we follow. The reason why we use a naming convention is because for easy readability, that's one. Another thing is uniformity, right? Across applications, when you know there are 5 bots that you have running in your organization, then with annotations and naming conventions and things like that, to be easy to navigate and understand what's going on really inside, right? So how do we use these naming conventions? Like, for example, as you can see in the screen, there's customer name and product price, right? If it is that, mostly they are strings. What do you mean by strings? Strings is just a collection of names, alphabets, right? You have various data types. I'll quickly come to that in a bit. But what I'm trying to tell you here is, when you have name or days, as you can see in the panel, that's a variable panel that you see out there. If you prefix it by what exactly it's talking about, here name is the variable type string, right? And you see I've put str. So when I say str, even if I'm not looking at the second half, I'm just looking at the name, I know, oh, it's a string and it's a name that's going to take. Similarly, with the next one, when I say days, right? Int days, so that's self-explanatory as well. So that's a little bit about uh, variables. So how do you create variables, right? The first one I showed you, directly go to variables panel, create it, you select the data type, and you're done. One more way to do it is either you go to designer panel or properties panel, right? And you press Control plus K. This is the quickest form of creating a variable, especially when you are, in the mode of coding. In between coding, you can't go to the variables panel, open it, and then declare the variable. That's a very quick way of doing it, as I will show you again in the demo. Go to the designer or the properties panel, as the case may be, press Control K, and you don't have to go and perform any additional declaration in the variable panels, right? So these are the 3 ways in which you can create variables in the studio. Now, what are the various kinds of variables? Here we come to the various data types that I spoke about a little while back, right? We saw string and we saw integer, right? In numeric, you have integer, long, double. So long and double carry larger numbers, right? Integer is basically a smaller number, doesn't carry decimals. So, and Boolean is very, very special kind of a data type which stores only 2 values, either true or false, right? So yeah, and collection, of course. We have the grand collection where you have arrays, list, and dictionary. I'll be covering a little bit of arrays here, but list and dictionary, yes, we have more sessions. We can go into depth probably in the upcoming sessions, right? And of course, data table also we'll be covering in the next session. Date and time is very simple. You have lots of, permutations and combinations of date. And this is one of the most practically used in most of the uh, client situations, right? You create a folder with a runtime date and you want to know what time this bot started, what time it ended. So the date format is really comes handy many a times, right? So these are the basic raw data types that you will be coming across very frequently during your course of automation. All right. Any quick questions here so far? All right. Move on. A very close twin sister, as I may call it, for variables is arguments, right? So what is the difference between variables and argument, and how do we go about it? How do we go about it? I'm going to show you shortly. But what's the difference between a variable and an argument? Okay. Argument is basically you can pass values from one workflow to another, right? For variables, you use it in that particular workflow. You can't really pass it on from one to another when you have to pass it from one workflow to another. Now, what is a workflow? You may ask me, right? A main project will usually be divided into a lot of sub workflows. You cannot usually, it's not a healthy practice, and neither is it advisable to do all of it in the main. What is the reason? All of it, you can't do it in the main program. The reason being easy readability, and when you divide into smaller modules, you can reuse it, right, in other programs. For example, a login page. Why do you want to create a login page across with the rest of the code? Because when you use a login page to, let's say go to a SAP database, you can reuse it. The other somebody else who's wants to log into the SAP database can use your code, right? So that way you make small snippets of code independent. So that's uh, something for the workflow for you. So arguments. So when I say arguments, these are values passed from one workflow to another, right? There are basically three types of arguments, right? Input arguments, output arguments, and in-out arguments. As you can see, it is the same thing. Can you see at the bottom, you have variables, arguments together, right? So if if you want to, uh, uh, pass arguments, you just click on arguments and you move on and you create all this, right? Now, what is in, what is out, and what is in out? When I move from workflow A to, let's say, workflow B, so I'm passing some value. There is some process that I have done in workflow A, and I'm passing that result to workflow B. And that workflow B further uses that as an input and does further processing, right? So that's how you share the output of one and pass it on to another. Now, why is it called an input variable? Because it's one directional. I can only pass it from one code to another code. I cannot receive anything back. So if I need to receive anything back, let's say from B to A, then in my process A, I will be putting the particular variable as an out variable. Again, in out is not very commonly used, but yes, but in and out is that variable can be passed in as well as brought out, so, right? That is there. And if you can see the naming conventions, we are maintaining str customer name, int customer ID, str welcome message. That doesn't change, right? What is new here is whether it's an input argument, output argument, or in-out argument. IO for in-out, out for um, out argument, and in for in argument, right? So that way, when you know how self-explanatory it is. Just a small diagram. So you have workflow 1 and you're invoking a workflow 2 and you carry data to workflow 2 and carry data from workflow 2 and in and out goes both ways, right? So that's basically it. Now, just like I've already told you what is an invoke workflow, you will, there is an invoke workflow activity. We're going to see that shortly. And those are small pieces of code that you can divide it based on your convenience, right? Okay, now you have conversion methods. There are a lot of conversion methods, right? Sometimes you want to convert a particular piece of integer into a string just to put it in conveniently in some reports or messages. And you convert double to a string. Most of the things are converted to string just for messaging and for reporting and things like that, right? Uh, but yeah, these are the things. So you can either use convert to string or double to string. You know, double is nothing but a decimal number, right? So uh, you can just quickly go through all this it's all self-explanatory in your curriculum. There's nothing much to explain. You just need to try. However, the easiest way would be to use CSTR or CINT, right? So for example, when convert to STR, so CSTR of uh, let's say 32 will give you string 32, right? Convert to string. So you can explore all this. There are many, many more like this, and you can just play around with all of this and experiment on it, right? All right. Now here comes the big one. So here, these are various types of workflows, right? So we just a bit while back we saw what is a workflow. So workflow is just small pieces of code bundled up together for easy readability and reusability. You have three types of workflows, right? Sequences, flowcharts, and state machines. Again, I'm not going to go deep into a state machine because you have an entire unit in that, and it's a large monster by itself, right? So I'm just going to give you a briefing on that. Sequences is what we are going to see in detail, and flowchart is something that I'm going to touch upon as well, right? So what are sequences? Sequences is usually for very small projects. You cannot do without sequences in any of the projects, right? Even if you're using a flowchart, there will be some sequence that will involve within the flowchart, right? Sequence are just the order of steps, one after the other, it executes, right? It's very simple, easy to understand, and it can be reused again. Flowchart is very decision-making thing. It's a very diagrammatical representation. It looks very interesting to see. It's it's a lifesaver in many of the decision-making algorithms that, you see. What if this happens? Then if this condition is fulfilled, go to true, false. It branches out into Boolean variables. Is true or false? True, you do the next set of steps. False, you do the next set of steps. From there, you can further branch out. So all this can be possible in sequences, right? So flowchart comes very handy, the visual representation, and it's easy to understand as well. Now, state machines is like what I would say. It's like a you know it's a finite number of states in its execution, right? There's a starting state, there's an ending state, and there can be a few states in between. So what do you mean by a state machine? State machine is nothing but a state of a particular transaction, right? So let's say I go to a bank, I go deposit the money, it takes some time, it goes, till it goes and deposits in my account, it takes some time, and there is a in between a stage where there is a little bit of wait, and then I go. So this basically what I'm trying to say is one round of transaction has to complete for the next transaction to come. So that's like a cycle of thing. So more about it, you will definitely be reading it. I don't want to, say too much. It might be a little confusing at this point, but just understand that state machines can have finite number of states, and um, it is, the initial state and the final state, right? So this is a brief diagram where, you use sequences, these set of actions that you see one after the other. These are flow charts, which has true or false, and these are state machines, which has multiple states, right? Now, um, global variables and constants. What do we mean by a global variable? This we will come across when I'm talking to you, that how do we define the scope of the variable? So how far does the variable reach? Does it reach to the entire project? Does it reach to the entire sequence? Does it reach the entire, or is it very localized to a particular sequence? All these things we are going to see very shortly. Next is arrays. Yeah, arrays are again another, you want to store multiple values, like in a chain of things, you can use array. So I'll be briefly touching upon how you declare the array, what are the multiple ways of initializing the arrays, and how do we access the array element, right? So I think we can move on to the practicality of it. So far, any doubts? We can take a minute for this. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to basically, I've done some pre-work so that we save up on some time. But to start with, I'm going to tell you how do I start a sequence. So let me start a sequence. See, the thing about sequence we need to know is it needs to be very clean in understanding, and very clean in, uh, uh, the sequence of the steps that we are going to do, right? So what I mean by that is, let me just go here and add a sequence, right? So if I'm going to say, let's say I'm doing an assign statement, right? Assign statement is nothing. I'm just going to assign a value to a variable. So here is where I'm going to tell you what are the various variables. Let's say I'm saying str underscore. This is the variable panel. So I told you, right? There are 3 ways to declare it. Now I'm going to quickly show you str name string and what is the scope. See here, it's a local or a global. I'll come to that shortly, right? So for that, a main sequence will really help, right? I'll tell you why. And this is just a raw example I'm giving here. And I have the main neatly done over there so that you can look into things, right? So I have this one sequence. I have a second sequence outside of it, right? So just to show you that, let's say rename this as sequence 1 and this is sequence 2, right? All right. So just to show you, This is how I've declared the variable here. There's another way of declaring is I can go directly here. I can put control and K. You see there? Okay, str, let's say age or int, right? Age is more like an integer. So we can put int age. So now you see int age I didn't declare here, but when I go here, you see int age is already here, but only thing is I want it as an integer, so I'll go and change it. Default will be always string. And there's another thing, right? You can go to the properties panel as well yeah. So go to properties panel as well, and the same thing I can do here. That's what they said, the 3 ways of declaring it. So here I can do a control K and I can declare here as well, right? So now you see the beauty of the sequence here. First, you change the name of the sequence. Then you classify, you put 2 more sequences. So here what I'm going to do is I'm accepting first name, last name, and the age from the candidate. That's all I'm doing. So I want to put that in a sequence because that is like a bunch of things, right? I accept all the input from the candidates. I name it so well. And this annotation, how do you create an annotation? Just go to a sequence and just create annotation. Now it doesn't come here because I've already added the annotation. But if you want to see, I can go here quickly and show you what is this. Where is yeah, add annotation, right? And I can put whatever I want here. So this is for easy readability. So now I know that what this project does, and I know what the sequence does. So I've put all this, accepting the values here, and I've segregated it into summary of all inputs, right? So it's just that why am I doing it in 3 categories, right? Because when we see here the variables, I want to see, can you see this differences in scope? The first variables, all these are in the main sequence, right? So I've put it as a main sequence over there. Then the next one, the second part, I don't really need it for the main sequence. I don't want to waste it, right? So you must make the variables as localized as possible to that sequence. Global variables are these are global variables, right? Here, name, F name, L name, age. Because why are they global? Because they are in the main sequence. That means they can be used throughout the XAML. I can use it throughout the XAML, but I can't use it across XAMLs. Why? Because for that you need arguments. XAMLs, I mean workflows. Okay. So this is how we do it, right? Yeah. So here is where, so input dialog is something that you can get here. So you take values from the, so everything comes in an activity, right? Guys, so just all you need to do is just pull it out here and I populate these values. So one is the label and all that is self-explanatory. You can easily try it out. So now I'm going to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly execute this and show you what's going to happen here, right? So how I executed, you saw I put the debug mode because it is a little slow. So I can show it to you, as I'm doing it, right? And right, here's the catch. This is my age. So I'm just consolidating it and putting it out here. That is from the second sequence, right? I'm going to okay, your first project is successful. Thank you very much. So this is how it is. And yeah, so I've defined a variable here where it actually see what I've done here is all the input, right? Whatever they receive from the, like Purnima and Sambasivan and all that, they are stored. So first name is stored in a variable called first name, which I've already pre-declared here. And then I have, L name for last name, then age for age. I've used those variable names, right? Actually, typically I should be doing str age and all that. That's my bad. So please do make it. I can actually, that's another thing that you can easily see here. That's a fun thing that when I change here, right, we don't have to go and worry about changing it elsewhere, right? So you see, it has automatically now changed in the code. See, can you see here now? It's become strl name. So it's really a fun thing and to explore and experiment, right? And of course, here I have given a few more. So now you see when I'm in the main sequence, it's showing me only the main variables, right? But when I go to the next sequence, it will show me the rest of the variables also because I have given the scope here. So this is my local scope. This is my local variable, right? Because it is restricted. It's a local to that particular sequence. And this is the global variable. These are all the global variables because they are part of the main sequence, right? This is the main sequence here. All right. So now I'm going to show you a little magic. So what we are going to do is just watch me. All right. What do you see here? Extract as workflow. I'm just clicking on it. Say create. Oops. What happened there? What happened there? Okay. So when I do this, I actually selected this entire sequence and I actually converted to a workflow. So when I say workflow now, I have, it automatically takes in as an argument. Can you see here? All the variables are converted to arguments, but we don't need to really use it if we don't want to, right? Because we already have input uh, thing from here. Otherwise, what we can do is if you want the input as a separate workflow and output as a separate workflow, I can still go on and I can extract this as a separate workflow, right? So it's up to you really. I mean, how you want to go and how you want to, modularize your workflows and how you want to treat each part of the code for reusability, right? This is what we are seeing here. All right, so this is talks a lot about variables and arguments is what I declare here, right? So when I'm going to show you a little bit on the arguments, Dinah, I hope we have some time here because I have to cover other things as well. So let me know if we are good with the timing.
Yeah, I think
All
we're
right,
good.
great, thank you. So here, if you see, here we have made it into an argument, right? So when I go here, this is because we said invoke as workflow, it's already created. And of course, we need to do the naming conventions. It's not going to do everything for us, right? So we need to do something as well. So whether it's in, out, and input, output, we just decide accordingly and we move on to the next uh, page, right? So for example, here, let's say input output is _str name, or I am not going to really change it here because I might have to change it there as well. So I'm retaining it for the sake of convenience, but we should remember to change the name of the variable to in underscore, right? So all these things, I'm going to keep it as an input and one output I'm going to get, let's say a success message, right? Out underscore success maybe. So I'm going to keep an out. So let's see if that comes out of here, right? So how do I know that this variable is coming out, right? How do I send it back basically? So what I do is I need to put an assign statement, right? So you're assigning the out variable, yeah. One second. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have done it here. Yeah. So come here is equal to the value of success, right? Success is here. So when I do that, okay, when I do that, the success value of success is basically passed on to this file and you get the answer out here, right? So suppose I put a message box. Let's say message box. Out underscore success. How do we know whether it's a earlier message or this. I would say this is the out argument. Okay, I'm just adding it here. Let me see. I'm going to execute this. I've
Yeah,
done
if
it on the
somebody
go,
could
so
please
I really don't.
unmute themselves, if somebody could please mute themselves. There's some noise in the background. Thanks.
All right, so okay, okay, this is done. Now you see it's come. We have, I don't know why, we need to a little bit debug and see, but this is the idea, right? So when you do an out success and when you push your value to the out argument, you can actually bring it out here. There is some error message coming. So just play around with it, understood the concept, because if I go into debugging this, it might consume a little bit of time, but it's fairly simple. In arguments is what goes in, out arguments is what comes out. So, all right. So let me move on to what is our next thing here? Yes, we have covered sequences, right? So now you understand how the sequences work. And important part is write the annotations and the order, I mean, name it so well that it's easy to readable and easy to understand and read, right? Next type of workflow, what we are looking at is a flow chart. Again, a flow chart, I'm making it very simple, very, very simple. See here, you have a start where you are accepting an age, right? So if the age greater than 20, you go to one side. If it's less than or equal to 20, you go to the other side. These two are nothing but I think there is a, yeah, it's a right line. You know what's a right line, right? Right line writes it in the output panel. There are two ways of simple, there are multiple ways actually, but the very simple two that I can recall quickly for output is one is your in the output panel, you use right line. That's a statement that you're using here, right? Right line, that is what it is. I've used, this is what it is actually. So if I pull it out, you'll understand the same thing, right? So I'm just putting another one is a message box. Message box is the pop-up that you'll see, right? So it's like an input dialog, but it doesn't take any input. It just shows you an output, right? So it comes like when you run it, it comes as a box, like a pop-up, right? So for the sake of the demo, I've used right line, right? So it's a very simple thing, but what you need to remember here is you need to have a start node, right? You can see set as start node. This is very, very important for a flowchart because if you don't do it, the flowchart will really not know which is the starting point. So I'm setting this as a start node. And when I execute it, you will see the same input dialog comes. It asks me for the age, right? So if I put 20, it is going to go to the left side. I mean, sorry, it's going to go to the right side. If I put more than 20, let's say 50, it's going to go to the left side. The left side, it will say true, or it will tell me it's more than 20 years, less than 20 years, right? So it writes here, right? So if you can see in the thing, the candidate is greater than 20 years of age. So something like that. So I've given a very simple example, but the business cases will be really, really, really large. But the advantage is it looks very neat. It looks very readable and you know which branch you're going and you know the direction of your flow. There's no confusion, right? So that's the advantage of flowchart. Now, the last section of today, we are going to be, I mean, from my side, right? Before we move on to Priya, my side will be the state machines. There. Oh. Yeah, okay. So, yes. So state machines, I again have predefined it. Like I said, I'm not going to go too much in detail. But what you can see is there is an initial state and okay. And they have something called as transitions. So transitions accepts conditions here. You can give whatever condition you want. At the moment, I don't have any specific condition. So I go to state 1, and in state, what I do is I take a random, this takes some random number and it accepts a number from you, right? It's almost like an infinite loop that goes in, but I'm going to stop that in between, right? This courtesy to UiPath, so I've taken this directly from there, but it's a good example for a state machine, right? So this is, the right. So there is an entry and an exit point for each of the states, right? I'm not going to go deep diving into it. So don't really worry about whether you understand this or not. This comes as a separate chapter by itself. But at the moment, you can focus on the rest of the things, whatever we have talked today, and just have an idea about what this is, right? So when I am going to, so here you see from the each state, I can go back to the previous state, right? So what this does is it takes a number and it generates a random number. So you'll have to guess whether the number you said is the random number generated by the system. It'll give you clues. So if it's a bigger number, you go back to guessing the number. If it's smaller number, again, you go back to guessing the number. Only if it's the correct guess, you go to a final state, something like that. But this kind of goes to an infinite loop. I think you can't guess a random number, right? So anyway, so I will just execute, let's say 20, right? So your guess is too small. You try a bigger number. All right. So I'm going to guess 80. It's too big. So, it keeps going on. So I'm not going to go to that loop. I'm just going to stop it at the moment, right? So this is where I end my session. So far, any doubts? Give you a few minutes before we move on to Priya. Anyone has any questions? I know I went a little fast, but I also think I made it a little simple for you guys to understand. I would really request you to go back home and just try it hands-on, because that's where the magic is. It's not really about learning it, but it's about trying it that matters more, right? So please feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you, Purnima.
Thank you. Thank you, Diana. Over to Priya.
All right.
So
Thank you,
Priya,
Purnima.
did you
That
want to
was a
introduce yourself, please? Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks, Purnima, for going through the basics. That was really, I bet, like helpful, and the chat is really active. So keep the questions coming, and that's what we want. We want to keep this community interactive. And thank you for everyone for their questions, and I really love it. And understanding the workflows and the variables and arguments is key, because like now going forward we will be using the terms variables, arguments, or sequence, so it's always easier to understand what you're looking at and what we're talking about. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hope you all can see.
I can see it, Priya.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana.
Mm-hmm.
So now we are going to dive into control flows. Okay, so control flows are self-explanatory if you look at the words, basically understanding how your flow is going to be controlled. So these are basically conditions or the set of order in how it's going to be executed. Because whenever you're designing your workflow, your business process has a set of conditions. Every business process comes with a set of conditions on how it's going to execute, what it needs to check, how many times it needs to run. So all those are decision points. So those decision points are being used as control flows here. So the most frequently used decision points that we have within UiPath are if, while, do while, for each, and switch statements. So these are basically like classified into two types. One is the conditional workflows, and the other one is the, and the loops. So if you look at it, there are two types of control statements that we use. So the conditions are basically the decision points where you say like, okay, if this works, what do I need to do? And then like in the else if, where you add multiple conditions to check like what it needs to happen. And the switch statement is basically you have one condition, but you could have multiple outcomes. And every process, you could have different types of loops based on the number, based on a condition, or like from a collection, you need to run this several number of times. So that's where these loops come in. So let's take a look at it one at a time. So the first condition that we're going to look at is the if condition. This is the very basic condition and it's very simple. So as you can see from the picture, the if activity has the condition where you specify what your condition is going to be. All you're going to do is like check if marks is greater than 60. So that's a very simple condition where you say if this happens, then I do this set of actions. And if it doesn't, then it becomes false. So there you write your other set of activities that you're going to do. What if the condition fails? So that's why you have the condition and then the then part where your condition is true and your else part if your condition is false. Okay, so this is very
all or nothing.
Pierre, sorry, you had a question?
Yes,
Okay.
please make sure you're on mute if you're not talking. Thanks.
All right, so the next condition that we're going to look at is the else if. So this is slightly different than the if condition, but very similar, okay? So here, we're going to add multiple conditions, okay? So in your else if, first you specify a condition. If it's true, then you write your set of activities in the then part where you perform your actions if the first condition is met. But what if, like you want to provide grades? So think of this example where you have like grades. So if your marks is greater than 90, you want to provide them with like 8 plus. So otherwise, if your mark is greater than 80, you want to provide them with A. So you add your second condition in this else if part, and you can keep on going. And let's say by default, if none of these conditions are met, then they fail. So that's where you use the else part. So this else if comes into picture where you branch out multiple conditions. So remember the if activity, you just use it for one condition. The else if, you use it for multiple conditions. And here's the other condition statement that we're going to use. This activity is called the switch. Okay, this is slightly different than the else if because with the switch, you put one condition, but you could have multiple outcomes. So think of it like whenever you're running like an invoice or, there are different states that comes. So you have started, pending, approved. So these are different outcomes. For this specific scenario, you specify your condition one time and then you use your other states, the outcomes, as cases. So under each case, you can specify your set of activities that you're going to perform within those body. So for each of these cases, we are going to specify the activities that you're going to perform. So this is always useful when you have more than, like more potential outcomes that are coming. The key difference between the switch and the else if is that this switch case only evaluates once. So the condition is checked once. But the else if, it evaluates each time because since you have multiple conditions there. And yeah, this is like a key point. I'll tell you that like sometimes there's a question about this in your exams. So remember that, okay? Now we are hopping on to the loops, okay? So with the loops, the very first loop that we're going to look at is the while loop. So with the while loop, what happens is your condition is specified first and its activities are performed underneath. So what happens is your condition gets evaluated first and then it does the activities. And like with your conditions, you can specify like how many times this loop needs to go. So there is a possibility that if your condition fails the very first time, there's a possibility that the while loop, the set of activities that are inside the body, may never execute at all. So there's a possibility that your while loop can have 0 executions based on your condition. So remember that your while loop has the condition up front. So first it checks for the condition and then it does the set of actions that are specified.
So here's an example that was provided that if your robot is playing blackjack, it should first calculate the hand before deciding whether it needs to draw another card or not. So now very similar to the while loop, just imagine that the condition is at the bottom. So this is the do while activity. So in this do while activity is where you first specify your actions, what actions you're going to do before you meet the condition. So before you actually check for whether this condition meets or not, that's where like you will use the do while. So in this part, the only key difference here is that you want to check whether these activities executed at least once. So with the do while, at least one time your activities get executed. And with a while loop, there's a possibility that it could execute none of the time if the condition fails. And the next loop that we have is a for each loop. This one is like a corporate favorite, I would say, because most of the time you have collections, you have folders, you have like, emails or like a set of collection. So that's where if you have a set of collection and you need to iterate a set number of times, like based on the collection, what that's given, then you would use the for each loop. So basically you just add this for each loop and in here, like you would specify the collection. And then for each item within that collection, you perform the set of operations. So an example that I could give is like if you read your Outlook and then you read all your unread emails, let's say you have like 800 emails. So for each email, you want to, let's say you want to forward or you want to do a certain activity, then you would like iterate each email there and then you would perform your activities within the body here. Okay, so that's where your for each comes into play. And now we've talked about like so many loops, you also need to know like how do you exit a loop, because loops are always fun that it keeps on going, but there needs to be a way to get out of the loop. So for the while and the do while loop, it will exit based on the condition. When the condition is no longer applicable, it's no longer true, it will exit out of the loop. Okay. Now the for each loop, it's based on your collection. Okay. So it will automatically exit once it finishes everything in your collection. Okay, so let's say you have like 100 emails. It goes through the loop 100 times and then it just exits. And outside of that, we also have the break activity, which exits the loop for the for each while and do while at a chosen point. And once it breaks the activity, it moves on to an activity outside in the workflow, outside of the loop itself. So it breaks the loop and it comes out and it does the very next step in your workflow. Okay. And the continue activity, it basically skips, let's say something happens and something breaks and you have a continue activity, it will still perform the remaining steps in the current iteration and continues to the next iteration in your loop. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm just going to dive into the studio in just a second. This way. Okay, so I'm going to show you a very simple condition here. Okay, we're going to try to accommodate this. Oops. Let me just put just one person. There we go. So I hope you all can see my screen with the studio here. So all I did was I just went ahead and created a brand new process. Okay, so for this demo, I'm just going to show you each and every condition and the loops as well. Okay, so I just basically created a workflow, like just a sequence here that's called conditions. And this is what Purnima showed us just a second, like how to create sequences or how to create workflows. So very similar to that. So I'm going to show you the very first condition here, the if condition. Okay. So just for the sake of understanding, I'm making it very simple. All I'm going to do is check if 5 is greater than 3. Okay. So you could name your conditions like any way you want, like however you want to define. So all I did was I looked for the if activity here. And once you add that, all you need to do is add a condition. So the very first time, like I needed to add my condition, you just pull up your condition builder and it gives you a set of activities, like a set of conditions. So here you can specify only one condition. So in your if activity, you can specify one condition. So I specify my first value and then I choose what is my condition for. So here I go with greater than, and then I'm just going to specify what other value am I comparing against. So remember that if gives you a Boolean outcome. So it's either true or false. So there's no gray area here. You either get true or false. So that's how your if condition is going to be. Okay. So all I did was just using this condition builder. I just added this. And again, you can come and check like for the different conditions that are available. And you can also write your own conditions. So that's not a problem. And you can always have like multiple things added, but again, like you also check like if 8 is greater than 5, so you can check like multiple different things, but remember, always the outcome is going to be like only one, either true or false. So here the true goes into the then part, so which is where I'm just using a log message to say that the condition 5 is greater than true. And in my else part, all I'm going to do is like, okay, this condition was false, so I'm executing the else part. So here's where you could add like additional activities. Let's say like you're checking for an email if it's from this specific person. If it's from this person, then I want to upload it to this SharePoint. Or if it's not from that person, I want to send it back to the IT team. So you can like customize your workflow based on what your business process needs. Okay, so all you have to do is lay down what your conditions are, and then based on that, perform the actions. Okay, so I'm just going to run this a very simple example so that we could just see. And bear with me, sometimes my system's like just waking up. I don't know, it takes its own time with Studio. Okay. So as you can see here, it printed out the condition 5 greater than 3 is true, which is under the then part. Okay, so it satisfied the condition, so it went under the then part and it was able to succeed. Okay, so I'm hoping like no one has any questions. I'm just gonna like comment this part out. I'm gonna move on to the else if condition. Okay, so the else if condition is where you specify multiple conditions here. Okay, so for this example, all I'm doing is I'm just going to get an input from the user. So we're just going to enter a text, and here we're going to use a slide string manipulation function here to check like whether my conditions succeed. And again, don't worry, the data manipulation is the next session that's lined up. I think it's on March 5th. So feel free to stick around because we are going to go in detail with that. Okay, so don't worry if you know like how to write these conditions. It's very simple. Okay, so all I use is again like in my else if activity, the very first condition that I did is, I'll show you here. So if I wanted to check, so I'm going to specify my variable here. So before we dive in there, I know like Purnima showed you this. I'm just going to show you one more time. I just added this input dialog activity. We just ask the question, what's your input going to be? Input a text, and it's going to be in the form of text box. And wherever the input is given, that value needs to be stored somewhere. So I use my storage as a variable. So here I created a variable called input value. This value is what is going to be used in my conditions here. So I go back to my else if activity here, and we use the condition builder. Okay, so imagine if this wasn't there, this is how your blank condition is going to be. So here I'm going to specify my input val. So the variable that we just created, I'm just going to put that, and you can also specify like, okay, what is the condition that I'm going to check with? Here I chose ends with, and with what value do I want to check? So in my case, I just put th. Since it's a string, I specify with double quotes so that way it knows it's a string. And you wouldn't have to do that if it was a number, which is an integer, okay? So since it's a string, I specify this, and then once I hit add and save, I had my first condition. Since I already have it, I'm not going to add it again. I'm just going to remove that, and I hit cancel. So once you create that, it wrote me this condition. Okay, so my input value, whether it contains the value th. And if it does, it's going to go to the then part, very similar to if activity. And I'm gonna check the next condition. Okay, so in my else if, I can feel free to use like what other conditions that I want to add. So in my else if, I added another condition that says I want to check if the characters nd is the last character. Okay, and if it does, then I just specify a message box saying, okay, this ends with a character nd. Otherwise, I can go to a default else if none of these conditions satisfy. The default, like, the fallback plan is to say like, okay, it ended with unknown characters, because all I wanted was to capture whether it has these ending characters with th or nd. If none of those are true, I'm just going to specify this. Okay, so let's run this really quick. And again, I'm using like several different activities. So in this case, I just use message box just for the sake of demo. But if you're building like, enterprise level workflows, please don't use a message box. That was just for the testing purpose, or unless you have an attended automation that you want to run. Okay. So that's just a pro tip. Never use message box in your enterprise workflows if it's for like unattended robots. Okay. And also this input dialog, you could use it for attended automations, but don't use it for unattended. Okay, so in this case, I just want to say second. So this contains the characters ND. So let's see if the robot checks that out. There you go. Second ends with the character ND. Okay, and the same goes for the other two conditions as well. So if we run it again and we just like give something else, then it would go back to the default option here. So let's just run this. Okay, will this bit automation? This doesn't satisfy like the first condition or the second condition, which checks for the character th or the nd. So now it says automation ends with unknown characters, because that's not within the scope of our condition. Okay. So it's very simple to configure your activities that have these conditions, okay? So all you need to do is like identify what does your process need? How many conditions do I need to have? And just make sure that it's more visually appealing as well, so that it's easier to manage. And also always remember to name your activities, and also add the annotations that Purnima was showing earlier, because those annotations come in very handy when you have to go back and troubleshoot. Okay, so always remember to name your activities, and also, oops, I did the wrong one. So I'm just gonna comment this out. Okay, so now the next activity that I'm gonna show you is the switch case. Okay, so this condition is gonna have one condition, and you're gonna have multiple outcomes. So remember the example that we talked about, the invoice processing, where you could have several different states and outcomes. So we are gonna check which state it is, and then you provide the set of actions. So similarly, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to show you a very simple example. What we're going to do is we're going to have a variable called day, and I'm going to assign that day a value. Okay, so this is from the input. So I am specifying a default value, which is 4. And I'm going to check like, okay, if it's like 4, what day should it be? So for each of the values, I'm going to specify a case. So if it's number 1, I'm going to say it's Monday, 2, Tuesday, and so on. So I specify for all the 7 days. So if it's number 4, it has to tell me what day it is. Okay, so let's run this one. And this one's not a message box, so it's just going to specify on the output tab here. So once it finishes running, it's going to tell me what day it is. So the same switch case, you can easily like configure this, and all you're going to do is like just specify your condition one time, and then you're going to specify your cases. Okay. So the activity is also like pretty good because everything is embedded in your activity card and it's easier to add. So there's not too much action or configuration that you get to do in your properties panel in this case. Everything is like embedded in your designer view here, designer panel here. So like, let me show you. So it finished running and it says it's Thursday. So that's how we've configured it here. So as you can see, the body under the case 4 says it's Thursday, okay? So I'm just gonna show you like how did we do this, okay? I'm just gonna look for my switch activity. So again, you can do this in your sequence or in your flow chart, depending on like which switch case you're gonna use. And it's very easy to configure because like, again, all of this is available within your designer panel. So you're not like running between like, how do I configure this? So here's where you specify what expression you want to check. Okay, in this case, I just want to check my expression for the day. Okay, because like, what if my day is this specific value? So in the case of your invoices, you're going to specify what state it is in. So all you do is like just specify the value here. And then here you can see the add case. So this is how we are going to be like adding the cases based on like what state you want to check for. So for each state, in the case of invoice processing, I'm going to add a case for started, and then pending, and then ended. So like processed. So each of those would be the cases. And when you specify like whether it's a string or an integer, based on that, your cases will also vary. Okay, by default, this is showing me string. So I can easily add what cases that I want. And also you can have a very default outcome. So if none of these cases, then by default, I can have a set of activities to perform. So that's what your switch case is for. So always remember, the switch case has one condition and multiple outcomes, whereas your else if has multiple conditions and you can have the outcomes based on that. So that's all for the conditions for now. And I'm going to show you the loops. I know my system's like running really slow. I'm trying to get this off. Come on. Yeah, my VM's like pretty slow today. So in the meantime, any questions, anybody?
There's just a few at the end, Priya. It just says, can we add how many cases here? Would it be faster on Studio Cloud? I mean, max cases count.
Yeah, you could have as many cases. Most of the time, you know, like you would have like a set number of values. Just a second, sorry. Sorry, my system just froze, so. And again, this could happen if you're using a virtual machine, but most of the time Studio on my machine has been faster, except when you're presenting on Zoom.
Somebody's gonna buy a system for you. That's very nice.
Sorry about that. And
It's always good to know these things happen in real life.
so yeah, to that question that somebody asked, like how many conditions, I would say like you can have like one condition, because like that has only like one area where you could check the expression. So for the switch case, remember that like you can have just one condition, okay? But the outcomes could be multiple. So that's why I'm giving you this example. So like very similar to the bank example that we talked about earlier in the session, where you could have different states. So like your money could be like pending or processing, and then it's like, awaiting approval. So those are all like different outcomes. And then once it's processed, so for each of these state, you can send an email or notification to say like, hey, your state is this, and this is why like you'll have to wait so many number of days. So these are like different areas. Okay. These are different areas where you could use switch. Basically, you're just checking what state it is in, and your case will be the outcome. So that's where you will like do your actions based on that specific state. Okay. And okay, you guys can come with me on this. I just thought I fixed that. Sorry, just a second. I'm gonna kill my machine and restart again.
No
Sometimes
worries.
it happens.
Yeah, just there was another question in the chat about the recording. So just to for everybody to remember, don't forget to copy everything in the chat. There's great links there. It's where you can find the recordings. They'll be available a day after the sessions. There's also, if you have additional questions, you can put those on the forum for us, and that information is in the chat as well. And so just make sure you copy everything every time you attend our sessions, just to make sure you don't miss anything. But we're here to help you. So, that's why we're also recording everything for you guys, so that you can go back and look at it, later. It's available. Somebody put, how long is it available for? I don't think we've ever lost one. I've been here for 4 years, so I think we still have recordings from 4 years ago, so don't worry about that. We like keeping these recordings available in case somebody wants to self-study and go through our sessions anyway, so it's just a good best practice. You'll find these on all of our events. We tend to record everything, so.
Yeah, and again, like don't feel confined that like even though you're doing these sessions, like the pre-read, or like you're doing the self-paced study on Academy, if you run into issues like if you hit a wall not knowing like what's the answer, like how do I find this, please feel free to use the forum, because the forum is the best place to start. I think Revati has shared the link, and you can use the forum link to ask your questions there as well. And always do the practice sessions that are available on your academy, because that will really take you a long way. Because if you repeat the academy exercises again and again, what it does is it gives you a sense of practice, and also it gives you a feel for the tool as well, so that now you will know by default, like the back of your hand, where the activities are. What do I need to do? I know like early on somebody asked like, okay, do I need like Java activities? Like if I need to use Java code, where do I get it? So here's where you see this manage packages. You could just download a set of activities pack for any tool, like any like any software, like SharePoint, Jira, like Microsoft Cloud, like like OneDrive. All of that is available within the managed package. So the package manager is the one that gives you the set of activities pack. So feel free to use that, and the more you use the tool, you will start exploring. Okay. All right. So I'm glad my system's back up. So I'm going to show you the loops. I'm so excited to show you the loops. Okay. So with the loops, we have just the while, do while, and the for each. Okay. So for this example, I'm going to show you the do while loop, which basically does the set of activities first and then checks the condition. Okay. In this case, I just have like two variables to just do like, counters as counters. And I have like the step number 1 and the number of repetitions. So it's gonna like do the set of activities a set of times and then do the check. So in this case, all I'm doing is like increasing my counter. So all I'm doing is just incrementing my step counter. So it's just adding step plus 1. And then I will write the step counter like, what's the count? And then it checks whether the step counter is less than the number of repetitions. So each time it checks, then it's going to run. So by the third time, since I put the number of repetitions as 3, by the third time, it's going to exit out of the loop. Okay. So let me just show you this. And this is the do while. So very similarly, I also have the while loop configured. Just the same thing. All I'm going to do is do a condition first. In this condition, all I'm going to check is like if my counter is greater than 3, I'm just going to decrement and just like check what's my counter. Okay, so let's run this. So I have both the loops and you'd have to choose like what suits your process. Okay, so for each workflow or for each business process, you would have to identify what works best for me. I know like all these conditions and loops are available. So these are just tools that are available for you, but you would have to pick and choose what works best for you. Oh, of course, this one, this is the other workflow. So we'll just look at the loops for now. So the first do while loop, what it did was it basically did the increment and it like first specified the increments and then it checked for the condition. So it ran 3 times because we wanted to check if the condition is true. And then like it ran it again. And for the while loop, this one is slightly different because like it would check the condition first and then perform the activities. So as you can see, it ran the loop and then it specified. Okay. And again, like these conditions are very similar to what we saw in the condition builder for the conditions if, else if, and also the switch there. This is exactly the same, just with a while loop. So all you need to do is just click on this plus and you would see the condition builder and you can specify what activity or what steps that you want to do. Okay. Now I'll show you the for each loop. The for each loop is the most fun one that you most frequently use. Okay, in my case, like I'm just going to use this files, the folder that I have. So I'm going to just show a sample folder where I have like a very simple set of files here. And I'm going to have to iterate for each of these files. And you can specify n number of actions within your body. All I'm going to do is just write my file name. Okay. And feel free to like, imagine all your business processes that uses this for each for various different actions. Because the same for each, you could iterate based on the number of emails. So any set of collection, an array of emails, an array of integers, or like, a collection. So all you do is like you're working on collections with a for each loop. So for each item within that collection, I'm going to do a specific set of action. That's what for each is. So here, all I do is like from that specific folder, I'm just getting all those files. And now this variable called files is my collection. So I'm going to iterate on those files. And for each item in that, I'm just going to write the name of that file. So that's what it ran, and it specified the name of each of those files here. So again, any questions? So anybody has any questions that you'd like to unmute and ask? Like, okay, someone has more precise on the condition builder. Okay. So for the condition builder, let me show you. There we go. So the condition builder is available on your conditions if, else if, switch, not switch, maybe like the while and the do while. So if you go there and just click on this plus, you would see this condition builder. Okay. So here, like imagine my first condition was not there. This is how you would look at it for the first time. Okay. So the very first time I could specify like, okay, what conditions do I want to check? So we would specify any number of conditions, right? So you would specify your first comparable value to like, what is it that you're comparing? What is your condition? Is it equal to, or is it like, you could specify n number of conditions based on this. Okay, once you have this, then you specify the equivalent value, like what you're comparing against. So this is what your condition builder is. And again, since now I have like multiple conditions, I can also add like, do both of these conditions need to be true? Then my final condition is true or false. Or like, if even if either or, like if one condition is true or the other one is true, pass this condition. So then it becomes true or false. So again, these are based on what you want. Okay. So I can add n number of conditions again. All you need to do is like specify like what values you're comparing against, and then like you can just set your values. Okay, once we have that, then we can just hit save and your conditions. Sri Reshmi, you had a question?
Yeah, can you please put yourself on mute if you're not talking? Thanks.
Ajay, was that good for you? Like, I
Yeah,
hope
Priya.
you got the
Yeah. Thank you, Priya.
sure.
Definitely start using.
Yeah, I will say that this time, with the modern experience of the studio, it's more interactive, like where you just like, use the drop down. Because like early on, like many early developers like me and Mole, like all of us, we use the expression builder where we had to write out these conditions. So I would say now the modern experience is so much fun that you get to interact with your activity directly and you can just build out your conditions.
But I feel classic are more comfort, Priya. Like even
Oh,
I'm the I'm the new learner. Like since 3 months, I'm into UiPath. So I'm feeling like rather than using I'm a bit confused using the modern rather than the
okay.
classic. Yeah, classic is
So
so comfort. Like
even for you, I will say like feel free to use this area then. So if you feel like that is more complicated, I would say like instead of using the condition builder, if you're more comfortable with coding and if you're like, well versed and knowing how to write it, I would say just use this area, just write it out. And like
yep.
you can just like specify like your conditions directly here. So this tool basically like helps out like any type of developer, whether you're beginner or advanced or like super expert. This really is comfortable for all of us. So if you don't like the condition builder, I would say like use this part. So just directly go here and look for your specific like like what variables you want and what specific conditions. So this IntelliSense also comes into play just like your Visual Studio if you're using or any other IDE. This is very similar as well. So you can just specify, okay, like you could just add your conditions just right here.
Yeah.
If you use LinkU or any type of queries, just feel free to use it right there. Okay, so don't worry about the
Thanks,
condition
Priya.
builder for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Priya.
Okay. And again, like just for the sake of demo, I've added like a couple of activities. But like Purnima said, like just name your activities, because what happens is when you add like build your workflow, you might have hundreds of assigned. And when you're troubleshooting and an error happens, it's very hard to identify which activity is that, which assign is the one that's having the issue. That's why if you see an activity like this, like that you just added, just say, okay, step counter increment, or in this case, decrement. So this way, I know like, okay, whenever I see this activity and it throws an error, it would say assign step counter decrement. So that way I know exactly where it is in order to troubleshoot it. Okay. Always add this, because this comes in handy, especially if you're the developer and let's say 6 months down the lane while it's in production, running up and running, and something goes wrong. You might be working on something else. You're not going to remember every single thing that you wrote 6 months ago. So that's why it's always a note to yourself or to any developer that comes and supports your project. Okay. So Surinder, is the for each loop clear? Like, any other questions?
I didn't see any other questions, Priya.
Awesome. So again, please feel free to use the Academy, go through the course there. There's a section for the control flows as well. And just go through this. They have a couple of exercises I could actually like show you really quick. And that's gonna really help. And please sign up for your next session. So I know like right now we are on March 3rd. We just completed a session 1, and we will have our next session on data manipulation. Preeti will be like walking us through. So always just feel free to like sign up and just use that. And I'll try to show you here. So here are our next sessions that are lined up. So just at least like register for all these different sessions. That will really help. I'm trying to get in Academy and it's been loading for a while. Okay, but if you go to the Academy and you use the learning plan, like you will see the under the developer associate, for today's session, you would see the variables and arguments and also the control flows. Just go through the practice exercise there. They have a very nice, like very simple example. And when you can ace that, you will definitely feel more confident with the tool as well. And you'll be like more comfortable being a developer. All right, Diana, over to you.
Okay, great. So, thanks, Priya and Pramia, for going through all the lessons today, and everybody else helping on the call and the chat. I was very impressed with the activity, the level of activity, and the engagement today. You guys are a great crowd. So, we're excited to see you on Wednesday. Don't forget to go through your self-paced study. If you guys need us, we're here. Don't forget the UiPath forum to ask any questions. And then please just try to get through your self-paced training as much as you can. You're not going to get dinged if you don't get through it all, but it just helps when you're going through the lessons so you can ask our experts directly about any questions that you might have. So it's just better for you. But with that, we'll have the recordings available tomorrow and the slides, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.